Marcus Hall pushed his cart down the sterile corridors of Astonsheim Medical Center at 2:17 a.m., the squeaky wheel echoing off polished walls where million-dollar decisions were made daily. To the doctors hurrying past, he was just another shadow in scrubs, invisible, disposable, someone whose name they'd never bothered to learn. They had no idea that the quiet janitor mopping their floors once held 3 patents in biochemistry and had published papers that changed how the world understood cellular regeneration. In the gleaming halls where life and death decisions happen every day, the most crucial discovery would come from the one person everyone ignored, the janitor who noticed what the doctors missed, the invisible man who would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of medical power. The ammonia scent of industrial cleaner had become Marcus's cologne over the past 18 months. He moved through the night shift like a ghost, emptying trash cans and mopping floors while the skeleton crew handled emergencies. Nurses barely glanced his way. Residents stepped around him as if he were furniture. The attending physicians acted like he didn't exist at all, just another service worker whose presence was tolerated but never acknowledged. At 43, Marcus had grown used to being invisible. The calloused hands gripping his mop handle once pipetted solutions that could have revolutionized cancer treatment. But that was before the whistleblowing, before the congressional hearings, before his name became synonymous with the kind of ethics violations that pharmaceutical companies spent millions to bury. Dr. Lindsay Martin swept past him in the hallway, her heels clicking against the linoleum with the sharp authority of someone who'd never questioned her right to be there. She didn't even glance at Marcus as he pressed himself against the wall to let her pass. To her, he was just another piece of the hospital's invisible infrastructure, as essential and as forgettable as the ventilation system. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman who wouldn't meet his eyes was running trials that violated every principle he'd once fought to protect. "Excuse me," came a tentative voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Eva Rain, one of the new surgical interns. Unlike the others, she sometimes nodded when their paths crossed. Sometimes even said thank you when he emptied the trash in the break room where she studied. "Have you noticed anything strange about Ward 7C lately?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Marcus paused, studying her face. Eva's dark eyes held genuine concern, not the performative worry he'd seen from doctors who cared more about liability than lives. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting, he could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the weight of sleepless nights spent wondering if she was missing something important. "What kind of strange?" he asked quietly. Eva glanced around the empty corridor. Patients with similar symptoms getting moved to the same wing, extra security around certain rooms, Dr. Martin personally overseeing cases that should go to the residents. She ran her hand through her black hair. "And the mortality reports. They don't match what I'm seeing on the floors." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. The same instinct that had once made him question falsified test results was now screaming warnings. "Room 712, he said after a moment. "The patient there, James Morrison, admitted 3 days ago with acute respiratory distress. But I've been cleaning that room, and his symptoms don't match his chart." Eva's eyes widened. "You read the charts?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus could lie, could retreat back into his invisible shell, or he could trust this young doctor who was brave enough to ask questions that could destroy her career. "I used to be a biochemist," he said simply, "before this." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. Eva stared at him, her mouth slightly open, as if seeing him for the first time. "Dr. Marcus Hall," she whispered, "the Theranos whistleblower. The congressional hearings about falsified cancer trials." Her voice dropped even further. "You disappeared after that. Everyone assumed you'd left the country or killed yourself," Marcus finished. I just learned that sometimes the best way to see the truth is from a place where nobody's watching you." The next night, Eva sought him out again. This time, she brought a tablet loaded with patient files that officially didn't exist. "Experimental Protocol 247X, she said, showing him encrypted data that made his blood run cold. 12 patients, all showing the same progression of symptoms, all being treated with an unlicensed compound that's not in any of the public trial databases. Marcus studied the data with the focused intensity that had once made him one of the most respected researchers in his field. The compound's molecular structure was familiar. Too familiar. This is a derivative of the cellular regeneration therapy I helped develop at Biomax, he said, his voice tight. But they've altered the binding sequence. This version would cause rapid organ failure within 72 hours of administration. Jesus, Eva breathed. Why would they? Because if it fails spectacularly, it discredits the entire research line, Marcus said. Someone wants to kill this therapy permanently. The question is why? They found their answer in Dr. Martin's private files, hidden behind enough encryption to protect state secrets. The real trial data showed that Marcus's original compound had a 78% success rate in treating late-stage pancreatic cancer. But Biomax's biggest competitor, Meridian Pharmaceuticals, had invested $17 billion in a competing therapy that was showing only 23% efficacy. She's sabotaging her own patients, Eva said, her voice shaking with rage, killing them to prove that cellular regeneration therapy doesn't work. Marcus stared at the screen, feeling the familiar weight of moral responsibility settle on his shoulders. We need proof they can't deny, and we need someone who will listen. The medical board won't. Not the medical board, Marcus interrupted. Sarah Chen at the Washington Post. She's been investigating pharmaceutical fraud for years, but we'll need more than files. We'll need a patient who survives long enough to testify. Room 712 became their war room. James Morrison was dying, but slowly enough that they might save him if they could counteract the poisonous therapy he was receiving. Marcus worked nights, monitoring Morrison's vital signs and adjusting his IV drip with medications borrowed from the hospital's pharmacy. Eva covered days, falsifying reports to make it look like Morrison was declining according to Martin's expected timeline. On the fourth night, Dr. Martin made her rounds earlier than usual. Marcus barely had time to slip into the supply closet before she entered Morrison's room with two men in expensive suits, Meridian executives, he realized, recognizing them from the pharmaceutical conferences he'd once attended. The therapy is performing exactly as predicted, Martin was saying. Total organ failure within the next 12 hours. This should be enough to convince the FDA that cellular regeneration therapy is too unstable for human trials. And the other test subjects? All showing similar progression. We'll have 12 documented failures by week's end. More than enough to kill Hall's research line permanently. Marcus pressed himself against the closet wall, his heart hammering. They weren't just committing malpractice. They were committing murder to protect a $17 billion investment. After they left, he emerged to find Morrison's monitors screaming alarms. The patient was crashing, his body finally succumbing to the poison that had been fed to him for days. Marcus looked at the man's gray face and made a decision that would either save a life or destroy what remained of his own. He pulled out his phone and called Eva. "Get Sarah Chen here now," he said. "Room 712. And bring the crash cart." For the next 6 hours, Marcus worked to save James Morrison's life, while Eva documented everything on video. When Morrison's breathing stabilized, when his heart rate returned to normal, when the cellular regeneration compound finally began to work the way Marcus had designed it to work, Sarah Chen was there to witness it all. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, federal investigators had seized all of Aston Syme's research files. By Friday, Lindsay Martin was in federal custody, and Meridian Pharmaceuticals had lost $47 billion in market value. Marcus stood in the hospital administrator's office, still wearing his janitor's uniform, as Margaret Walsh struggled to find words. "Mr. Hall, Dr. Hall, I want you to know that this hospital had no knowledge of Dr. Martin's activities," she said. "And we would like to offer you the position of Chief Ethics Officer with a full research budget and—" "I'll think about it," Marcus said quietly. He walked out of the hospital for what he thought might be the last time, carrying the plastic badge that had identified him as maintenance staff for 18 months. But Eva was waiting in the parking lot. "The FDA wants to restart trials for your original compound," she said. "Morrison's recovery has been remarkable. They're talking about fast-track approval." Marcus looked back at the building where he'd been invisible for so long. "I'm not sure I want to be visible again." "Maybe visibility isn't the point," Eva said. "Maybe the point is being useful. Being where you can help." 6 months later, Marcus stood at the podium in the hospital's newly renamed Morrison Research Center, looking out at an audience of medical students, researchers, and journalists. The plastic maintenance badge sat in a glass case behind him, a reminder of what could be accomplished by those society chose not to see. "Talent doesn't wear a lab coat," he said to the packed auditorium. It doesn't come with the right degrees or the right connections. Sometimes it comes with a mop and a late-night shift and the willingness to notice what everyone else ignores. In the back of the room, he saw Eva applauding, her eyes bright with the kind of hope that made medicine more than just a profession. That evening, Marcus walked through the hospital corridors one final time as chief ethics officer. The night shift janitors nodded respectfully as he passed. Maria from El Salvador, who spoke 3 languages and had been an accountant before immigration status forced her into service work. David from Detroit, who noticed patterns in patient behavior that the psychiatric staff consistently missed. Jenny from rural Kentucky, whose intuitive understanding of human nature would have made her an excellent therapist if anyone had bothered to ask. Marcus made a mental note to schedule meetings with each of them. The hospital's new ethics initiative would need people who understood what it meant to be invisible and what it took to finally be seen. He paused at the window overlooking the city, holding the old maintenance badge in his palm. The plastic was worn smooth from 18 months of use, a tangible reminder of the most important work he'd ever done. Sometimes, the most important discoveries, he whispered to his reflection, come from the people nobody expects to be watching. The lights of the city stretched out before him, millions of people, most of them invisible to those in power, most of them carrying talents that would never be recognized. But some would be. And maybe, if he'd learned anything from his time pushing a mop through sterile corridors, it was that the most powerful thing you could do was help invisible people become impossible to ignore. The badge caught the light from the hallway, casting a small reflection on the window glass. A tiny beacon in the darkness, proof that even the smallest lights could illuminate the deepest shadows. Talent doesn't depend on titles or recognition. Remember this story so you never walk past those who only seem invisible.